The wind moved across the Alaska tundra, like something half alive. A low moan rolling over the snowfields and pushing against the skeletal outline of a cabin that had been abandoned for more than 2 decades. For most of the year, this place was unreachable, sealed behind ice thick as concrete, a white desert that swallowed footprints in seconds. But that year, after an early, violent spring thaw, the ice cracked open. What had been frozen in place for 23 years finally shifted, just enough for someone to see the cabin again. And that was where our story begins, with a call to the Alaska State Troopers in the early morning hours of May 4th, 2025. A pair of hikers had spotted something unusual near the old cabin by Caribou Lake. The door, long frozen shut, was hanging open, not just ajar, open wide, as if someone inside had finally decided to leave. Detective Samuel Hart had taken the call before his first cup of coffee. He'd worked plenty of cold cases before, but this one, he remembered, had the kind of weight that lingers in the air years after the investigation is stamped and filed away. A missing persons case from 2002. A woman named Lydia Moore, a young school teacher from Anchorage who disappeared over Thanksgiving break. No body, no note, no sign of a struggle. The only clue, a report from a snowmobiler who swore he saw a single set of tracks going toward that cabin days before a massive storm sealed everything shut. Investigators had reached it weeks later, but by then, everything was frozen. Walls, floors, windows, even the hinges of the front door. They could not open it. They could not get inside. And before they could attempt again, the snowfall buried it for the season, then the next season, and the next. Eventually, the case went cold. Lydia's parents died without answers. Her sister moved out of state, and the cabin was swallowed back into the ice. But now the ice had melted, and the door had opened. Hart drove out there with a team while the sun was low, though in Alaska in May, the sun barely dipped below the horizon. Anyway, the sky was a strange shade of gold, clouds scattering the light like broken glass. He had always felt something uneasy about this part of the world. It was not like the lower 48, where woods felt familiar and predictable. The Alaska interior had a way of hiding things, holding them tight in permafrost, as if the earth itself refused to give back what it had taken. The cabin stood crooked and exhausted, leaning as if the years had pushed it down slowly. Snow still clung to the shaded side of the roof. The door swung lightly in the wind. "Why's it open now?" one officer whispered, stepping behind Hart as they approached. Hart didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone on scene felt the same thing. That this was not just the thaw. This felt intentional, as though someone or something had waited for the ice to loosen its grip before allowing the truth out. He stepped inside first. The temperature dropped immediately. The interior was dim, lit only by thin daylight pushing through frost-bitten windows. Dust floated in the air, caught in the beam of his flashlight. The room smelled like old wood and time. There had not been an animal inside, not a single sign of life. It was as if the cabin had been vacuum sealed by the ice, preserved like an artifact. There was a chair in the center, a small iron stove, a battered table with a lantern that hadn't been touched in decades. And then, beside the far wall, he saw it, a pile of collapsed floorboards that looked different from the rest, as if softened by moisture long before the rest began to rot. Hart moved closer. "Detective," Officer Ramirez called from the doorway, voice tight. "You're going to want to look at this." Hart turned. Ramirez was kneeling just inside the threshold, brushing aside a thin layer of snow that had blown in. Carved into the wooden floor beneath was a date. 11/29/02. The date Lydia Moore went missing. Hart knelt. The carving was shallow but deliberate, not something made by accident. He reached out to brush away the rest of the snow, and the floor shifted beneath his hand. A hollow sound echoed softly under the remaining boards. Something was beneath them. He stood, grabbed a pry bar from his bag, and wedged it into the seam. The first board splintered easily. The wood had lost all strength. The next piece came free with almost no resistance. And then he reached the third board, the one directly above whatever was making that hollow sound. He pried it loose and froze. Beneath the floor, tucked inside a space barely 2 feet deep, was a metal box. Frost covered its surface, but he could still see the rust creeping along its edges. A small padlock dangled from the latch, broken. Someone had unlocked it long ago, before the ice sealed everything. Hart swallowed, forcing breath into lungs that suddenly felt tight. He lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items: a winter scarf folded carefully, a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case, and a small leather notebook with pages sticking together from years of moisture. On the first page of the notebook, in handwriting that trembled even though the letters were neat, someone had written a single sentence. "If you find this, it wasn't the storm." Ramirez cursed under his breath. 2 other officers hovered behind him, silent. No one reached for the evidence. No one moved. Hart finally spoke. "Bag it. Everything." There was no drama in his voice, but there was something else. Recognition. A cold line of dread running through memory. He stood again, scanning the room, his flashlight moving slowly across the walls. Something inside him said that the truth was not in the box. The box was only the beginning. Something else was here. Something left behind intentionally. His beam stopped on the far wall. A mirror hung crooked beside the window, its glass clouded with age. But that wasn't what caught Hart's attention. The mirror was slightly angled. Not enough to fall, but enough to suggest someone had moved it. And behind it, barely visible from the side, was the corner of something white. Hart stepped toward it slowly, feeling the weight of the room shift with him. The mirror creaked as he lifted it, dust drifting toward the floor in a slow, silent curtain. Behind the mirror was a message written directly onto the cabin wall. "There were 2 of us." His stomach tightened. He stared at the words longer than he should have. And then another detail clicked into place, one he hadn't wanted to notice. The handwriting on the cabin wall matched the handwriting in the notebook. "Detective?" Ramirez said again, softer now. "What does that mean?" Hart didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. He lowered the mirror gently, as though trying not to disturb the air around the words. He felt something old press down on him. Memory, maybe, or guilt. He'd been a rookie in 2002. Fresh badge, shaking hands, too eager to impress. He'd worked the Lydia Moore case for only a day before being reassigned. But he remembered something. Something he had pushed down for years. When I first searched the area near Caribou Lake, the snowmobiler insisted he saw not one person on the trail, but 2. One walking, one following. Back then, the claim was dismissed. The storm had wiped out all tracks before investigators could confirm, and it was easier to assume Lydia went alone. Easier for the report. Easier for the department. Easier for everyone. Hart's throat tightened. Time does strange things to memory, but fear, that's to our shar. He turned to Ramirez again. We need the ME, a forensics team, and I want every inch of this place photographed before we touch another thing. Ramirez nodded and stepped outside to radio it in. Hart walked toward the broken floor again, kneeling beside the open box. He lifted the scarf. It was wool, once white, now yellowed by time. He recognized it from the case file photos. Lydia wore it in the last known picture taken of her. He set it gently back. Next, he lifted the cassette tape. It was unlabeled except for a handwritten number, 14, the same numbering format used by tape recorders in the Anchorage school district at the time. A breath escaped him. The cold hit him in a wave. He stared at the tape as if it might answer the questions building in his mind. Why number 14? Were there others? Who left it here? Why hide it under the floor? And who was the second person? He slipped the cassette back into the evidence bag, then reached for the notebook. Most pages were blank or smeared with moisture damage, but the last page, the one untouched by water, tucked deep in the back, held a message. Not written. Scratched. Scratched into the leather so hard the letters looked like wounds. He is still here. Hart froze. For a moment, the only sound in the cabin was his own breath and the endless, restless wind outside. He looked around the room again. The shadows, the narrow hallway, the dark corners that seemed deeper than they should be. The cabin had long been empty, but something in the air made him feel like someone had only just left, or worse, was still close. He felt a presence, or maybe it was fear finally catching up after years of trying to stay professional. The floor creaked behind him. He spun around, flashlight raised. But there was nothing, just the open doorway, the wind, the snow drifting in thin lines across the floorboards. He exhaled slowly, too slowly. His pulse took longer to settle. When the forensic team arrived 40 minutes later, the sun was higher, light scattering across the melting snow like silver powder. Officers marked evidence, photographed, took samples, cataloged the box, the floor, the handwriting, the messages. Hart stepped back, giving them space. But he couldn't shake the words. There were two of us. He is still here. Two sentences written decades apart, but in the same hand. By Lydia, or by someone else? When the ME finally arrived and began inspecting the perimeter, he called out from the back of the cabin, "Detective, you need to see this." Hart followed the voice out the rear doorway, stepping into a patch of snow thinning under the warm sun. The ME pointed to the exposed earth at the cabin's foundation. Something was glinting faintly, metal catching the light. A necklace, a silver locket. Hart knelt and brushed off the dirt. The locket was dented but intact. He opened it, and inside was a tiny photograph, faded but still clear enough. Lydia Moore, smiling. The last known photo of her had no locket. She wasn't wearing this. Someone had taken it. Someone had buried it. And someone had opened the cabin door after 23 years. Hart stood slowly, the locket heavy in his hand. "We're reopening everything," he said, his voice steady but low. This wasn't the storm. Someone knew she was here. Ramirez approached, holding up the evidence bag containing the cassette tape. "Detective, what if the tape still works?" Hart looked at the forest stretching out in every direction. Quiet, endless. He felt the cold press deeper into him. Then, he said, we finally hear what happened. The wind moved again through the trees, softer this time, almost like breath. Someone knew. Someone always knew. And part 2 would reveal just how close that someone still was. When they brought the cassette tape back to the Anchorage crime lab, no one expected it to even play. 23 Alaskan winters would destroy almost anything, especially something as fragile as magnetic tape. But as Detective Samuel Hart stood behind the glass window watching the technician handle it with soft gloves, he felt an unmistakable pull in his chest, a sense that whatever was recorded on that tape had survived because it was meant to. The technician, a young specialist named Kira Sloan, carefully wound the cassette into a restored player from the early 2000s, one of the last machines that could read something like this without shredding it. She adjusted the connectors, tapped a few keys, and looked at Hart. The tape is warped, she said, but sections might still be audible? Hart nodded, the fluorescent lights buzzing above them in a steady rhythm. It was strange how quiet the world became during moments like this, as if the universe held its breath. Do it, Hart said. The technician pressed play. For a long stretch there was only static, deep, uneven, like wind blowing through a tunnel. Then faintly, something surfaced. A breath. Then another. Then a voice. A woman's voice. Soft, trembling, breaking between words. If someone finds this, I don't know how much time I have left. Hart felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. The tech glanced at him, her eyes wide. The static swallowed the next few seconds. Then the voice returned, clearer this time. My name is Lydia Moore. I'm at the cabin near Caribou Lake. I came here because he said he needed help. I thought he was hurt. I thought he was alone. A long pause, breathing. Then, but he lied. Hart closed his eyes for a brief moment, fighting back the surge of memory. His early days with the department, how they dismissed theories that didn't fit cleanly into reports. A rookie's opinion never mattered. But he remembered the snowmobiler's eyewitness account. 2 figures, one following the other. The officer in charge had told him it was impossible, that the storm erased everything, and therefore no tracks existed to confirm it. Easier, simpler. Just one person. Just Lydia. The tape crackled violently, as if the recorder had been shaken. When Lydia's voice came through again, she sounded terrified. I'm not the only one he brought here. Another long pause, a thump, something hitting the floor or a wall. Her breathing quickened, shallow and panicked. He keeps saying the storm will hide everything, that no one will come, that no one knows I'm here. But if you hear this, please. A loud bang cut her off, followed by a sharp, muffled scream. The microphone scraped against something, maybe the floorboards, maybe her hands as she tried to hide it. Then a new sound entered, a second voice. Male. Calm. Too calm. Lydia, he murmured. Why are you making this difficult? Hart's chest tightened. He felt himself leaning forward as though getting closer might change what happened next. The male voice continued, still soft. I told you not to talk into this. You don't need to leave messages for anyone. No one is coming. They won't find you until the spring, and by then, you'll be long gone. Lydia's breathing kicked into sobs. She whispered something, too faint to understand. Don't you see? The man said. You weren't supposed to follow me. You weren't supposed to find out. Tape scrambled into a wash of static again. Hart clenched his jaw. Every instinct inside him screamed at the lost seconds, the pieces missing from time. Then suddenly, the recording cleared. Lydia, again. She must have gotten the recorder back. If this is the last thing I say? There were two of us. He brought someone else before me. Please find her. The tape clicked. Stopped. Hart didn't move. None of them did. Finally, the technician whispered, "Detective, there is more." She rewound a section manually, tapping the wheel gently. There's something faint, background noise, right before the recorder shuts off. Maybe another voice. Hart nodded once, jaw tense. "Clean it up. Take your time." He moved away from the glass, pacing the narrow lab hallway. The walls felt too tight, too close. 23 years, and the truth had been sitting beneath the floor of a frozen cabin, trapped like Lydia herself. He thought about the handwriting carved behind the mirror. There were two of us, and the final message scratched into the notebook's leather. He is still here. Still here where? Alaska was enormous. He could be anywhere, or he could be nowhere, long dead, buried, hidden by the ice. But Hart didn't believe that. Not anymore. When the technician called him back in, Hart returned to the console. "I isolated the background audio," she said. "It's faint. But listen." She hit play. Static. A soft thud, then a whisper. Male again, but not the same tone as before. This voice was lower, rougher, almost like gravel pouring between teeth. "Don't leave her." Hart stiffened. He played it again, and again. The voice was too distorted to get a name, but the message was clear. There were two men, two abductors. One spoke to Lydia, the other spoke to him. The notebook message suddenly made sense. "There were two of us" wasn't Lydia's cry for help. It was a warning, or a threat. The ME's report came in 2 hours later, confirming what Hart already suspected. Lydia had never left the cabin. Her remains, or what was left of them, were found buried under the foundation, the same patch of earth where the locket lay. Frozen solid for years, preserved like an artifact, and she wasn't alone. Beneath her remains were bones that didn't belong to her, smaller, older, a different woman, unknown. Hart stared at the photos under fluorescent lights, each image shining with the cold truth. 2 victims, 2 perpetrators, 1 cabin, 23 years of silence. Later that afternoon, Hart took the notebook, the tape, and the locket, and drove out to the records division. He requested every file from the 2002 search area, every missing persons case from the late 90s and early 2000s within 100 miles, every snowmobile registration within 2 counties. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "That's a big pull. It's a big case. Thought it was one missing woman." Hart looked at him. "It's not." Hours passed, the sun dipping low but never fully disappearing. Outside, the world felt too bright, too wide. Inside, the fluorescent lighting hummed above stacks of files, old paper, faded ink, memories forgotten by almost everyone. Everyone except Lydia. He opened the first folder. Lydia Moore's case. The early reports looked different now, almost careless. Interviews too short. Leads dismissed too fast. And then Hart saw something he had somehow forgotten. A list of potential persons of interest. All crossed out, except one. A man named Owen Reddick, volunteer wilderness guide, hunter, known in the area but avoided by most. The notes said he had been interviewed, but nothing incriminating was found. He lived near the lake then. A small cabin. A workshop. A second building. Hart's pulse quickened. A second building. One that had been destroyed in a fire several years after Lydia disappeared. The report blamed a faulty stove. The structure collapsed before inspectors arrived, the case dismissed. He flipped deeper into the file and found an old photo of Reddick, a gaunt face, sunken eyes, a smile that didn't reach anywhere near them. Next folder, missing persons. And then he found her. The unidentified bones under Lydia weren't the only match, but they were close. A woman named Sarah Lorman vanished in 1998 while backpacking near the same region. She had been traveling alone. Last seen at a general store, talking with a man fitting Reddick's description. Hart exhaled slowly. The timeline was clear now. Reddick had a pattern, and Lydia wasn't his first victim. The second man, the second voice on the tape, was still unknown. A partner? An apprentice? A witness? A follower? Or someone trapped like Lydia? Hart dug deeper, found a note in the file, a tip from 2004. Someone reported hearing two men arguing near Caribou Lake. One younger, one older. The voice on the tape, the gravelly whisper, felt younger, more unstable. Maybe a teenager then. 23 years later, an adult, a ghost in plain sight. Hart returned to the cabin the next morning. Snow had melted further. The foundation exposed more of its secrets. Forensics had marked new areas, each flag fluttering lightly in the cold air. Ramirez approached him. "Detective, you should see this. It was under the back step." Hart followed him. Under the warped wooden step was a strip of fabric. Blue, faded, torn. Ramirez held it up. "We found it wrapped around a piece of glass. The glass looks like it came from a window, but not this cabin." Hart took the fabric. It felt familiar. He placed it inside an evidence bag. "Where's the glass?" Ramirez brought him to the evidence table. The shard was thick, reinforced, the kind used in old pickup trucks. Hart stared at it, a realization tightening in his chest. A truck window from the early 2000s. He remembered something else now, something from the Reddick file. Owen Reddick owned a 1997 blue pickup, sold it in 2004 to a man who paid cash and never transferred the title. A man described as quiet, nervous, mid-20s, the same age as the second voice on the tape. Hart looked up at the vast expanse of the Alaskan forest. Endless terrain, endless hiding places. But even here, people leave trails. 23 years of silence didn't erase everything. Hart turned to Ramirez. "We need to find that truck." "After 20 years?" "Yes," Hart said, "because the man who drove it might be the one still alive." That night, Hart returned to his office. The cassette tape sat on his desk, the notebook beside it. He played the recording again. Lydia's voice trembling. The man's voice, calm, practiced cruelty. And then the whisper, "Don't leave her." The tone wasn't commanding. It wasn't angry. It was frightened, desperate, like someone begging the older man not to kill. A partner, but unwilling, or afraid. The second handwriting behind the mirror, the carved warning. Maybe it wasn't the killer's. Maybe it was the second man, a witness, a survivor, someone who knew everything, someone who was still here. Hart leaned back in his chair. For the first time, the pieces aligned. Two men, two sets of handwriting, two voices on the tape, one dominant, one submissive, one killer, one accomplice under control, and now only one likely still alive. The older man, Owen Reddick, would be in his 70s now. If alive at all. The younger man would be in his 40s, strong enough to open the cabin door after the thaw, brave enough or tormented enough to leave it open, a sign to the world, a cry for justice or for release. Hart rubbed his forehead. "What do you want?" he whispered into the empty room, as if speaking to the ghost of a man who might still be wandering the frozen world outside. The phone rang. He picked up. "Detective, it's Sloan," the technician said. "You need to come back to the lab." "Why?" "The tape. I cleaned it further. There's something at the very end we didn't hear before." Hart grabbed his coat, heart pounding. When he arrived, Sloan played the final 3 seconds. Between static, a faint voice emerged. "Sam." Hart froze. The technician looked at him. "Detective, did Lydia know you?" "No," he whispered. "That's not Lydia's voice." The voice said his name. His name. Only one person from that era ever called him Sam like that. A voice from his rookie days. A voice he hadn't heard in years. Not since he filed his resignation from the Backcountry Division. Not since the Lydia case went cold. The voice of the other rookie assigned with him. The one who vanished from the force months later. The one who left no forwarding address. The one who, on that stormy day in 2002, insisted he saw footprints behind Lydia's. The one everyone dismissed. The one who told Hart quietly, privately, someone followed her. The one who said, "Sam, I think one of them saw me." The tape ended with that single word, Sam. Not a warning, not a threat, a plea from the second man, the accomplice, or the victim. Hart looked at the technician. "Get me the full enhancement," he said. "Run prints on the notebook, the mirror, the box, and someone pull the old personnel files." "Whose?" the tech asked. Hart stared at the frozen world outside the window. "A former trooper," he said. "Name was Daniel Price." The wind pressed against the glass. Someone knew. Someone always knew. And Hart had finally heard him.